Welcome back to Midnight Whispers. Don't forget to subscribe, turn off the lights, and let's step into something you can't unhear. I grew up believing my childhood was quiet, simple, and soft. The kind of life people look back on with warm nostalgia. Even though deep inside me, there was always a cold room I refused to open. I created that life myself, stitching together memories that never happened, because the real ones were too violent, too loud, too soaked in terror for a little girl to survive. My therapists used to say I had a remarkable imagination, but they never knew my imagination was the only thing that kept me breathing. I remember sitting at the kitchen table at 8 years old, drawing pictures of a happy family, while the real images, flashes of red, screaming, and steel, flickered behind my eyes like a broken film reel. For years, I trained myself not to look at them, not to acknowledge the cracks in the world I invented. Cracks that pulsed like something alive beneath the floorboards of my mind. I carried this fake childhood into adulthood like a carefully crafted mask, smiling in photographs, laughing with friends, pretending the emptiness behind my ribs wasn't swallowing me whole. Every time someone asked about my parents, I delivered the same rehearsed lines, claiming they died in a car accident, though my voice always tightened near the end. I didn't realize the truth was still inside me, waiting like a predator in the dark corners of my memory, patient and hungry. The nightmares were the first warning, but I ignored them because they came in pieces: blood on wallpaper, a man's boots dragging across carpet, a door slamming shut. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convincing myself it was just stress or a bad movie lingering in my mind. Even though I hadn't watched anything remotely violent, deep down, I sensed something was wrong with the life I believed I lived. Like I was wearing someone else's childhood, and it didn't fit. I blamed my anxiety, my job, my insomnia, anything except the one truth buried beneath everything I thought I knew. Some part of me must have known the truth would eventually claw its way out, because the day it resurfaced felt less like a revelation and more like a long-delayed explosion. It started when I walked past a convenience store on my lunch break and saw an old newspaper displayed in a cracked plastic frame. At first, I didn't understand why my legs froze or why my pulse hammered in my ears. But then my eyes landed on the headline about a decades-old double homicide, and something inside me split open. I don't remember deciding to walk into the store. My body just moved, trembling, as if some buried instinct had taken over and dragged me toward the newspaper like a magnet. Standing there, reading the faded print, I felt my throat tighten as the names on the page began to echo in my skull with a familiarity that made me nauseous. The article described a brutal murder of a married couple inside their home. The case unsolved, the investigation cold, and next to the text was a grainy photo of a little girl reported missing after the crime. My lungs nearly collapsed when I saw her face, because it wasn't just similar to mine, it was me, a younger version of me, staring out from the page with eyes full of terror I once refused to acknowledge. The world around me blurred as memories slammed back into my mind like a series of violent blows, each one sharper than the last. I saw my father fall to the ground with his hands outstretched, pleading for breath that never came, while a man towered over him, gripping something metallic that gleamed under the kitchen light. I saw my mother try to run, her voice breaking as she screamed my name, but she was pulled back by the same man whose boots I had heard in nightmares for years. I remembered hiding under the dining table, my tiny fingers pressed against my lips, as if praying for silence, though my heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The smell returned next, the metallic, suffocating scent that clung to everything that night. And I felt my stomach twist violently as my vision darkened around the edges. What horrified me most wasn't the blood, or the screams, or even the moment the man realized I was there. It was the moment I recognized his face through the fog of panic and childhood innocence. He wasn't a stranger, nor a masked monster from childhood stories. He was my uncle, the man who used to bring me candy and laugh with my parents at family dinners. The memory hit me with such force that I staggered back, gripping the counter of the store as my knees threatened to buckle beneath me. I had spent my entire adult life building walls inside my mind to protect myself from this exact truth, constructing entire worlds to hide from a reality drenched in blood. The world felt suddenly too bright, too sharp, as if every sound around me was amplified and every color was burning into my eyes. I stood there, frozen between the life I thought I lived and the horrifying truth that shattered it, unable to pull myself away from the newspaper. It felt like no matter how many years had passed, I was still that 8-year-old girl trapped in a nightmare with no way out. A ringing sound filled my ears, drowning out the cashier's voice, drowning out everything except the storm of memories roaring back into existence. I realized then that forgetting hadn't saved me. It had only delayed the inevitable collapse of everything I had built. The truth didn't return gently. It tore into me like claws, dragging me back into the night my world ended. And as I stared at my younger self in that photo, I finally understood that the case had never been solved because I had been the only witness. I left the store on unsteady legs, gripping the newspaper with trembling hands, as if it were the only thing keeping me from drifting away into the chaos, unraveling inside my mind. The streets outside felt unreal, like a stage set painted around me, because because every step I took echoed with memories I had buried in the darkest corners of myself. I kept seeing my uncle's face, his twisted grin, his furious eyes, the way he muttered under his breath as he pulled me out from under the table and dragged me down the hallway that night. Part of me wanted to scream, to run to the nearest police station and tell them everything. But another part, the child still living inside me, was paralyzed with the same fear that kept me silent decades ago. As I walked, the city sounds melted into a droning hum that blended with the rhythm of that night. The rhythm of boots thudding against carpet as my uncle searched for me. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, slipping back and forth between my adult self and the terrified child I once had been. The life I had built, my job, my apartment, my friends, suddenly felt like a fragile illusion, something I had wrapped around myself to avoid facing the truth. I remembered how he whispered that no one would ever believe me, how he told me to forget everything if I wanted to stay alive. And I realized he had been planting those seeds of denial in my mind from the start. The memory of him kneeling in front of me, wiping blood from his hands before forcing me to look him in the eyes, made my skin crawl with a chill that went straight to my bones. I had always wondered why certain sounds, metal clinking, boots on carpet, someone shouting, made my heart rate spike without explanation. Now I knew they were echoes from the night my world shattered, triggers tied to a truth so horrific that my brain tried to erase it entirely. I kept walking, trying to escape the memories, but they followed me like a storm cloud, relentless and suffocating. My breaths came shallow, each inhale feeling like shards of glass scraping my lungs as panic clawed its way up my throat. For a moment, I thought I might faint, but I forced myself to keep moving, afraid that if I stopped, the memories would swallow me whole. I found myself wandering into a quiet park, collapsing onto a bench as I clutched the newspaper tightly against my chest. My eyes burned with tears that refused to fall, tears that had been waiting years to be released, trapped behind my carefully constructed delusions. I felt a strange mix of grief, terror, and rage boiling inside me as I realized I had been living my entire life with a murderer in my family, a man who had taken everything from me. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me as I tried to breathe through the weight of this resurrected truth. And as the sun began to set, casting long streaks of orange across the sky, I realized the case hadn't stayed buried because the detectives failed. It stayed buried because I did. That night, alone in my apartment, I unfolded the newspaper again and stared at the photo until the edges blurred and my vision trembled with exhausted tears. The room felt too quiet, too still, as if the air itself was waiting for me to finally confront the truth I had run from my entire life. I let the memories come this time, not fighting them, letting every horrific detail pour back into me like a flood that had been held behind a cracking dam. I remembered my uncle dragging me to the basement after silencing my parents, his breath hot and furious, as he told me that kids who talk end up like the ones upstairs. I remembered sitting in the dark for what felt like hours, hugging my knees to my chest as the house grew silent, except for the ringing in my ears and the distant wail of sirens I never truly heard. The next morning, he had put me in his truck, cleaned me up, and told me to forget everything, saying no one would believe a child anyway, and that lying was the only way to stay safe. He had taken me to a distant relative who never questioned why I arrived without my parents, and from that point on, my mind simply rewrote everything to survive. Sitting there in the dim glow of my apartment, I felt the weight of years crash down on me as I realized how deeply he had manipulated my childhood. My fingers trembled as I traced the headline, my heartbeat pulsing like a drum against my ribs. As I replayed the moment, I recognized the truth. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who hid under the table while the world collapsed around her. And I wished I could reach back in time and hold her, tell her she didn't deserve any of this. The fear inside me twisted into something sharper: anger, a blazing fury I had never let myself feel before now. I knew then that the case had been buried, not because the truth was impossible to uncover, but because my mind had made sure I couldn't face it. My hands tightened around the newspaper as I stood up, feeling a strange sense of clarity wash over me for the first time in years. I realized I couldn't undo the past, couldn't bring back my parents, but I could break the silence that had been forced on me since childhood. I walked to my desk, grabbed my phone, and opened the old case number that was printed at the bottom of the article, my breathing steadying as I prepared to speak the truth out loud. For years, I had been running from myself, but that night, I chose to stop running, to finally step out of the life I invented and into the terrifying reality I had buried. When I pressed call, my voice trembled but didn't falter as I told the detective on the other end that I was the missing girl from the case. And I remembered everything. And even though the truth was monstrous, even though it had destroyed everything I once believed, I finally felt something I had never felt before: freedom from the lie that had trapped me for decades.